Choosing the right font combination is the key element in building your brand. And if you don't know where to start, you've come to the right place. I'm going to be talking you through some different approaches when you're choosing your fonts, what to look out for, and I'm even going to throw in a free template so that you can get started immediately. The right font will reflect your brand values, have a personality of its own, and will attract your perfect audience. Let's go typo. Before we start, I'm just going to show you that I have included a downloadable link at the bottom, which has all the details that you need for what I'm going to be talking you through today. In terms of where we're going to start with choosing your brand font, there are a couple of fonts that you need to be looking for. So I've just broken it down into the four basic ones. So I've called it your signature font, which is essentially going to be like your logo type of font. It's going to be your main font. That title is going to be also very prominent. So your signature might be in your logo, and then your title may be at the top of your web page, for example. And then your headings, if you imagine like a blog post type of situation, your headings would be then coming up throughout your page, and then the body of text is going to be the large amount of text that your audience is going to be consuming. So you want something fairly standard and easy to read for large bodies of text there. So in terms of where we are going to start, where on earth do you start when you are looking for fonts and things like that? How do you start with your pairing? So what I'd like you to consider is you can actually start anywhere. So sometimes you come across a font that you just love. Maybe you've fallen in love with a specific font that you really have just been drawn to, and that could be your starting point of inspiration. Sometimes this doesn't happen. Sometimes you don't know where to start. Wherever you're at, I'll give you the next steps for where you need to go. So if you've got a starting point, that's great. Assign it to either the title or the signature or whatever feels best for you. If it feels like less pressure to start from the heading and work your way up, no problem. That works too. There is no order to this. You have to follow your intuition and find the path that works for you. But if you have absolutely no idea where you need to be starting, I would highly recommend going and having a look at our video, which teaches you how to draw your elements together to create a brand board. This is such a useful tool and really helpful for knowing what you are looking for. It helps you clarify your vision. I'll provide a link for that right below the like button below. But be sure to take a look at that if you've got no clue where to start. But essentially what you're wanting to decide on an adjective that's going to describe your brand. Adjectives being describing words. What is the essence of your brand? And that's where a brand board is so useful for helping create that. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of examples that I've put through. So we talk about pairings when we talk about our font, and we are wanting to create essentially a branding set. So this is a set that is consistently going to be used as your title and your heading and your body, as well as your logo font. Okay, easy reference points, something that's going to work well together. So let's just take a look at a couple of these examples here. Okay, I'll just run us through some sets that I've created just as examples. What you are wanting to do essentially, trying to create some kind of a contrast between your heading and your title, because very often these two will be paired together. They tend to go in this type of order. Just like you're wanting your heading and your body, if you think of that as a pair and this as a pair as well, they often will be nicely contrasting but have the same essence about them. So this is a fairly quirky type of combination that I've put together here, which is really, you can just see there's some irregularities in the text in terms of their shape and their size, and they're not all sitting on a line. There are sort of irregularities in terms of the thickness. Some is a bit thicker than others. And I really like that lent itself towards a kind of handwritten type of brand. I'm thinking sort of, I don't know, homemade things that give you that sense that it's less computer generated and more hand done. Here's another example, for example, which is slightly more masculine in terms of the marker that we've used. But you can see again, you've got the sort of the not perfect, consistency in terms of the marker coming through it. I actually really like that. You will see that I've chosen fairly different fonts for the signature and the title font. And that just is because they are often paired together. So you don't want something too similar. These two, for example, it would not work to have the heading font for the title. They're just too similar. Whereas if they were actually broken up by something quite different but complementary, that works really well. Here's another example down here, something more geometric and strong. These two will pair quite nicely, nice and bold. And then you have a little bit of a contrast here with thinner finer font for the heading, and then that strength and geometry comes back through in the body. And you're starting to hopefully get a sense of the different feelings that each of the fonts evoke. So that's what you're trying to tap into, is what is the feel of my brand? And then you're wanting to get some element of those feelings coming through in each one of these. Last example that I can show you here is quite a fine, almost romantic sort of, I've gone for like a whimsical type of feeling here. Again, we've gone for very singular, strong but elegant fonts for the signature, and then the title is much more softer and looser, but they work really well together. They pair really nicely. You've got this softness to some of the letters that come through, which actually complements these types of waves that come through with a brush. The heading again is similar to this, so they all actually link in really nicely and intertwine. So you could pick any of these for any of your design documents that you do, and it will immediately speak to your brand. So I'm hoping that this will give you an idea of what different kinds of pairings can do and how they can actually speak to feelings. So yeah, you're wanting to try and get some kind of a contrast between your heading and your title, and play with different combinations of using. When you are working with your fonts, make sure that you are also exploring different variations, making them bold or italic. And another great tool that Canva offers is checking them as all uppercase and lowercase. That is really helpful to know, because sometimes you're wanting a subheading, for example. Have they got that available? That's the question to ask. Some of these don't have all the options available. This one, for example, the bold and the italics is grayed out. So that is then more limiting. Now, I will generally tend to stay away from those fonts that then have limitations on them, just because I find that I've got lots of different situations where I want slight differentiations between them. But that can be down to personal preference. Some people never bother with that type of thing. You have also got the spacing to consider. Look at your letter spacing and the types of dynamics that creates. As an example, the finer fonts work really nicely with that. You've got this is your line spacing and your letter spacing. So that can also create a very interesting dynamic between them. So bear in mind as well, you don't need to actually have 4 different fonts. You can use the same font. So for example, you could use the same font for different parts and then just use those variations. So for example, that could be a slightly heavier font that is bold, and then you could explore whether you wanted that or not, or italics, for example, and then perhaps spreading this one out and then that one being more condensed. It already reads quite differently. So make sure that you bear that in mind as well. If you really like a font element, perhaps try exploring it in different forms. That's something really worth noting. When it comes to selecting your body, now some people will try and get quite creative here, and I would strongly suggest that you don't. In the body of your text, this is where large amounts of text need to be able to be consumed. If you're thinking of like a blog post or a paragraph, there are always parts where that needs to be, where you might need large amounts of text to be consumed. So you want that to be as easy as possible for your audience. I would always recommend using a serif font or a sans font, which is SANS, or serif sans, which is the combination of the two. There's a huge amount of those to choose from. If you just put sans serif, you see it comes up here as default, and you can see there's a huge selection that you've got to choose from there, and they will all be pretty easy to read, fairly straightforward, and obviously just don't go too extreme with that. I would go for something relatively standard, very legible. Okay, so just to talk about just the different types of fonts that we get. You get, something with like a handwritten feel. I know we touched on this briefly, but it really does lend itself towards having a very authentic feel, and that is something that is really desired very often in this very digital world. One thing I will say though, if you are considering a handwritten font or handwritten style, make sure that it is legible above all else. You want to be able to read your font from a distance on various devices at various sizes and various styles. Do not compromise on this. I've often seen people trying to go for, they're wanting to stand out, they go for something really different, and that is then at the cost of
people being able to read it, and then you will inevitably lose people if they can't read what you're trying to say to them and can't read what you're writing. So yeah, don't get caught up in that. Don't get caught up in the chase. Use the different elements that they have here to help yourself stand out with the spacing or the sizing, or all capitals. Do something to help you stand out. Okay, so you can start with, for example, with a font that speaks to your brand essence, and then you can make it your own through combining, images with your logo and colors and where you place it, or shapes and the different styles that you use, like the bolds and the italics. So that, in that respect, that is absolutely endless. But do not compromise on legibility. Make sure that you've got that as an option. This very geometric brand, you're wanting to see that essence that you're wanting is reflected through every single font that you've chosen. So just bear that in mind. Just keep going back and checking, what is the feel of my brand? Keep referring back to your brand board. That is then reflected in all elements. So it'll be reflected then through your logo, through your colors, through your style, through your font as well. So that it all needs to be cohesive and working together. And then moving on to the brush script that we've touched on already. I mean, this is just such a lovely sort of sense of nostalgia and grace. This, again, you can play with the spacing of it and make something that is just really quite elegant and set apart. So make sure that you are playing with that and exploring different options. Really, really lovely to get this sort of soft feminine style coming through. And yet, if you look at the individual fonts, bar this one, they're actually all quite geometric, but just very elegant with the different line weights and things like that, which just creates such an interest when you're looking at it. So as a starting point for where you're going to explore, you can go into Canva and add a text box here. And then this is where your fonts are. You click on that and you can then just type in your adjective. Okay, so you've got some examples here that you can start off with from Canva, some suggestions. But let's just say, for example, you had your brand name as you wanted a soft feel throughout it. And here you can already see you've got several suggestions that come up. So let's just say we want to type in modern. You literally type in your adjective that you've used to describe your brand from your brand board, or you've got obviously a couple that you can lean on to look into. And you can then just have a look through and see what the options are in terms of creating something that you feel is then speaking to your brand. So you want something that is setting you apart in your title brand. So let's say, for example, this is your signature brand here. So this is now, very standard, and you can then just test out different types that you've got coming up here. You will see that Canva does also do some suggestions. So they've also put contemporary in here as a suggestion. So make sure that you're also exploring those. That's great. That's a great sort of unusual font. So now for your next one, you're wanting to now remember to create something slightly different, slightly contrasting, but you are wanting them to obviously work together. You don't want something that you don't want them to be clashing or fighting with each other, fighting for attention. So you might even want to go for something slightly bolder, or perhaps you're wanting something that's just a little bit more sort of handwritten. There again, you've got the kind of marker effect, but it's still very geometric. And this is quite a fun element that's then coming through there. So that looks good. Signature and heading. So now the signature, I think we might just try that. That's quite fun as an all caps. And then I'm going to space the letters out a little bit more. That looks starting to look quite Art Nouveau-y, actually. That's quite fun. So for the title, I'm now wanting something that is probably more in line with this one. So I'm looking for something relatively thin. That looks nice, although it's quite similar. I think I might want something a little bit different. And you just see how I am literally just exploring. I'm trying a couple of different ones, and you just really keep going back to that base that you created. You you keep referring back, and you might want to try a couple of different combinations and then compare them side by side just to see whether that's going to work for you or not. I might now try, because I know I quite like this thin style. I might try typing in thin and just seeing what comes up. Now this is on dangerous ground in terms of legibility, so make sure that you are continually checking that. So that's quite nice. So that's sort of similar, slightly darker for a title, although the titles will be smaller, so that could work in our favor. I'm just going to change the alignment here so I can see what's going on. And then for the body, you are wanting a serif font. Now, just bearing in mind what my feel is something quite modern and contemporary, I might even try typing in both those words together. This sometimes works and sometimes you get mixed results. So let's just see. This might work. This is quite a condensed font. Yeah, I like that, but I don't feel like the thickness is working. That could be a good start. See how it's working together. So there is an example of the process that I go through when I am looking for how to create this. So just bear in mind that you use that tool. So you select your font, and then you are literally typing in your adjective into there, or any of your words that you've used from your brand board, and see what comes up, and try that as a starting point. Really great little tool that they've got there. Remember, you don't have to go in order. I just went like that because that's where I was starting, but you go in the order that works for you. So you will obviously see that as we're going through here, these little crown symbols are for the pro version of Canva. So that will only be available to premium members. We have found it really useful to be on the pro version, but I know if you're just starting out, that might be an expense that you can't quite afford. There are other websites which I will take you through. I've provided the links below in the video, as well as on the cheat sheet that I'm providing as a free bonus to this video. So here is something as well. You can also, they are broken up into so many different categories that might be useful, but I will just say, whichever font that you choose, the thing that you want to double check is the symbols. So some of the fonts on the different, this is DA font and free and font space. I'll provide the links below, but sometimes when I've used fonts from here, I then later discover that I don't have certain symbols. That's a really important one to check, and also to see how they look. I just gave you an example of the ambersands, which is the and symbol, and that they are very, very different. And I'm a person that likes to use these quite often, especially if it's a handwritten type of style. So you're wanting to make sure that that is then cohesive with your brand, and that you do actually even have it available. So often now we are using the @ symbols. You might need the @ symbol, or you might need your currency or something like that. There's so much that is available now. So you just need to make sure that that is going to be available to you, and that especially if you've used a quirky font, that is actually still legible, that it's easy to see what it's standing for. Some of them just don't have them. They haven't gone through and done all the symbols. As far as I've seen, Canva always has all the symbols that I've needed. The other websites don't always, so always check that beforehand. But I'll provide those. And another place to look on is Pinterest. They have, if you've put in font pairing ideas, you can also put in some of your other adjectives like elegant or free or anything like that, and you can closely match just about anything that you can find. So I hope you found that useful. I have provided some examples for you in the document so that you've got those as examples for pairing, and I can pop a link in the description below for this as well, if that would be useful, just to try out different styles. But you're really essentially coming back to the fact that you want your essence to be translated through your font to communicate what your brand is all about. Different fonts can communicate different things, as long as they come back together to the similar group of feelings that your brand is creating. That's all that you need. You're just wanting them to complement each other and not be fighting for attention on the page. It can be a little bit time consuming putting together the various combinations and trying it out, but it really is worth it. Font is something that I think a lot of people will overlook, and it really is a very key element in getting your brand right, because actually by getting that right, your brand will start to evoke this kind of indescribable quality that your audience will just feel so attuned to it. They will be getting the same message through the colors, through the font, through the logo, through the branding. It'll be a lovely interwoven feeling that they'll just feel so connected to the brand, and they won't even be able to pinpoint what it is. They'll say things like, I don't know, it just works. It's so me. You will just feel that connection and that loyalty that will then start building from there. So it's really worth putting the time into find the right font for your brand, find the thing that speaks to the feeling that you are wanting to create. So make sure that you check out the template down below. That's going to be a really helpful resource for you. And I hope you really enjoy just finding your brand's personality through the font. It's really a really great exercise to get involved in and sink your teeth into. Have fun.
Once you have your chosen fonts, you will need to clarify the vision for your brand, because that is the next most important step for your business. But how do you go about creating consistency for your customers? Well, if you're serious about building trust with your customers, make sure that you check out this video here, where I help you build a brand board where you can communicate that vision to new and existing customers, and I'll throw in a free template for you to get started immediately.